Okay, folks, before you smash that thumbs down button, because I know everybody hates pay to win, let's uh, let's address this topic because every few months something happens to where somebody makes a video, some streamer puts out a video griping about pay to win and how it's crept into some type of game that they love, how the industry needs to change, and in general, I haven't seen a single person recognize a point that I want to make in this video about why pay to win has evolved aside from corporate greed. We all like to blame corporate greed. But beyond that, there's actually a reason behind this that makes some sense. And I want to open some people's eyes to it for them to consider and figure out if there's a way that we can direct gaming companies to maybe do something that is little bit more favorable to us instead of just generally crapping on the idea. So let's get into these points a little bit. So I can't really say love it or hate it, but I will say tolerate it or hate it. Pay to win is not going to be going away, despite how much people are going to gripe about it, despite how much people are going to try and vote with their money. Pay to win is here to stay. And I'm sorry to have to break it to you. And you'll see why, hopefully understand why as I get into this. That's because the gaming studios have figured out something that everybody else seems to be missing. The streamers have all missed the boat because they're pigeonholed into their, I don't know, viewpoint or lens into the whole situation without considering a broader picture. And what we'll also talk about with this, how whales factor into all this. And I'd like people to stop conflating pay to win with pay for convenience. People want to lump everything into pay to win, and I'm sorry, but they're different, and hopefully I can make the points to support that. And then finally, with all these things said, what can we do? Because we don't want to sit around and just be nickel and dime to death. We don't want to see the proliferation of this, but knowing what I said earlier, that it is a necessary evil and it is going to be there, can we do something at least? Let's figure out if there's some type of path forward on this. We need to establish a baseline of what the player base is before we can launch into everything else. So, what is the player base? The player base is a combination of gamers, casual gamers, whales, dad gamers, streamers, etc. And all of these have one thing in common, and that is that they have some amount of playtime that they can put towards a game, and they have some amount of money. And each of these groups actually falls kind of somewhere along this. Think of it as a continuum, except for streamers. By the way, streamers break this mold, and you cannot. This model breaks down with streamers. So everybody else in the world you'll be somebody like somebody who has no job. This is your kids, your teenagers. They have no disposable income, so they have a lot of playtime and no money. And then you got people who are earlier in their career, or they've got a job that doesn't pay a lot, so they don't have a lot of disposable income. And generally, those people are going to have more playtime available to them. And then you get people who advance, they've got family obligations. It's your dad gamers, your casuals who can't invest a lot of time, but at this point, they probably have more money to spend. And then you got people with a lot of time obligations. These could be professionals, this could be high people who've achieved a lot in their career, so they've got a lot of work focus and they have a lot of money because of that, but they have very little time to play their games. And when you look at this and you look left to right, you realize this is kind of representative. This whole thing, the continuum, is kind of representative of time, or largely, or commonly, your age, or how far you've progressed in your life. People who are older and have progressed further in their career and their life will be more towards the right hand side of this with more money and less playtime. And so this is an important baseline when we consider the next things. So, what is it that the game studios know that we don't? Well, they figured out that game progression is dictated by player investment. And what do players have to invest? They can invest either time or money. So naturally, for if you want to be a successful game, you don't want to market yourself and sell to the full breadth of players, right? You're going to want to sell to the full breadth of that continuum. All the people, be they on the left-hand side, the kids, all the way through to the people who have a lot of disposable income. It makes the most sense, right? Because more players equals more success. Regardless of whether or not they paid any money, any of that, you simply want more players because it's going to lead to more success. And so the game studios realize this, and they're not willing to compromise and scope out any segment of that continuum. So gamers only represent the left-hand side, and most of the money comes from the right-hand side. So what do you think is going to happen? With an understanding of that, it should be pretty obvious that studios have come to accept and recognize that both forms of player investment are valid in their eyes, and consequently, they will always design for whales because that's where all the money is coming from. They're going to design the game to appeal to the full breadth and sell to the full breadth, but they're going to glean the money out of the whales, and then some other people are going to get sucked in the process. But such is the way that things are implemented. And the problem is that gamers refuse to accept that money is a valid player investment. Because originally games didn't have money as an investment, it was all time. And so for that paradigm to shift, people have not accepted the fact that money is a valid investment, or at least in the eyes of the game studios it is. And until we get that, there's going to continue to be anti-whale hate, because it's a natural reaction for somebody to react poorly to perceived inequity. If you're investing a bunch of time to gain the progress that you have in your game, and you've put all this time and effort forth, it's only fair that somebody else should have to do the same thing, instead of recognizing that you've invested time and the other person is investing something else. And so, unless that perception changes, if you can change your lens and how you outlook at the whole thing, then maybe if you recognize money as a valid investment, the hate to whales will stop. But let's be honest, that's never going to happen, is it? People are too rooted in the fact that games were an investment in time, or maybe this is a generational thing, and maybe the next generations, with pay always being part of the equation, will start to accept that money is a valid investment. Who knows? I'm a Gen Xer myself, and I have to call Asmongold out on this one because he keeps conflating boomers and labeling Gen Xers as boomers. Gen Xers are not boomers. It's a little bit insulting. Gen Xers are the people who grew up with Pong, Atari, Apple games, and have been gamers all our lives, whereas boomers absolutely are not. So anyways, I'm getting into that. The point being that as generations evolve and gamers evolve and the industry evolves, who knows? Maybe at some point people will recognize that both these forms of investment are valid, and maybe the hate will stop. Not likely, but maybe. But anyways, where do we go from here? Well, as it stands today, game studios are failing. Corporate greed is winning. The practices being employed by the majority of the game studios out there are horrible. They're predatory, pay gating, gotchas, all balancing in favor of pay for convenience instead of investment in time. It's really egregious, and it sucks. And is there a solution? Well, I mean, there's limited things that we can do. We'll get to that in a little bit. But if we could somehow convince the gaming studios that, assuming that we can accept that money and time are both valid investments, and once again, that whole discussion of whether or not that ever comes about, but nonetheless, if we accept that those are the factors, then really when it comes down to it, pay for convenience is the only tactic that fits both sides without negating one end of the continuum or the other. it gets the people who invest time the ability to experience all the content, and the people who don't have the time still also the ability to experience all the content. And in my mind, that's what's fair. You should not be gating people out of experiencing the entire game simply because they don't have one resource or the other to spend. Now, uh, it fit pay for convenience is better than pay gating. It is utterly unfair to completely block somebody from experiencing some aspect of the game simply because they can't or will not spend the money uh, to unblock that feature or gain access to that. That's simply unfair. So that's horrible. Gotchas are predatory because they simply prey upon people's gambling addictions and just elicit more and more money out of people. So, when you boil it down, the only reasonable thing that's left is pay for convenience. Of course, subscriptions, that's a whole different thing. But yeah, pay for convenience is really the only realistic. For for convenience to be a viable solution to this all, there are a couple of things that really need to happen. First of all, pay for convenience should never grant things that non-paying customers could not also achieve through just general grinding of the game or investment in time. It needs to be fair on both sides of things. If somebody can invest time, then and somebody does not have the time, they should be able to get to the same things, be it through pay for convenience. And on the counter side, somebody who pays should absolutely never get to experience things that a player who only invests time experiences. Now, it should also not lead to game mechanics and balancing and adjustments that encourage or force the pay for convenience aspect. You should not ever arrive in a situation in which you really don't feel you can progress in the game or experience the game unless you pay for convenience. That is also egregious, and that should not happen. So if somehow we can guide the studios to do these types of things and forego those other approaches of exploiting players through microtransactions, uh, we could potentially achieve a path forward that's not as bad as where we are currently today. So that covers what we'd like the gaming studios to do in how they handle their in-app purchases and microtransactions. But from our side, do we have any power in this? And to be honest, we do have limited power. But I'm going to align with what a lot of other streamers are actually proponing. I hear Asmongold say it all the time. Vote with your wallet. If you don't agree with the practices that a given game or studio is using to gain their money through their in-app purchases, don't participate in the game. Well, how do we do that? Because it's quite honestly, unless we do it all or nothing, we're very unlikely to have any impact. And quite honestly, there will always be people who are willing to shell out the money, which is going to make it really difficult. So the best we can hope to do is at least for ourselves make informed decisions about which games we choose to actually participate with and vote with our participation in that game. And how do we do that? If we could have and present everybody with the universal knowledge that is understood, or language that is understood about what game you're getting yourself into, that would allow us to. So, meaning, if we could expose a rating on any given game, and simply by this rating, you would know immediately, well, this game is highly predatory and requires a lot of in-app purchases, whereas this game, oh, I can tell by this rating, it absolutely does not. This is a game that I should consider playing because I am a free-to-play player. So by doing this, we could head off at the pass and completely avoid playing and investing in games that we are not interested in and do not deserve our patronage. So a rating scale like that might look something like this, in which we have on the one side of the scale, you would have a low end being a 1 and the high end being a 5, where 5 is highly predatory, lots of in-app purchases, pay gating, bad practices, gotchas, all the things that you hate, all the things that everybody hates. And on the other side of the scale are games that utilize very what's the word I'm looking for? They're they've got good integrity in what they're producing. Baldur's Gate 3 is a prime example, and I'm very pleased with how V Rising. Yes, it has some DLC, but it's not required to play the base level game. These are both solid games that deserve our patronage and are not going to be milking you for money. And then slightly up from there, another free-to-play game, Path of Exile, one of my absolute favorites. It does have some in-game purchases. They are primarily cosmetics. There are some minimal pay for convenience items, but you can get away without them, so it's not egregious. Final Fantasy with a subscription model, everything else is cosmetic. There are minimal pay for convenience in the auto leveling or being able to buy a job class up to a certain level, but not all the way. That's a pay for convenience item, but it doesn't break the game. And then in the middle, on 3, you would have a game studio that's actually taken the time to balance the pay for convenience aspects so as not to be overly grindy on the time side, doesn't require you to spend all the time in the world just to make up for what somebody else is paying for, and on the flip side, isn't unlocking things only through paying, and that you can pay for convenience and nothing more, nothing than any other player would not be able to get through grinding. And then slightly up from there. Now, I don't have it. Once we get to these upper levels, I actually don't have good examples here because I don't participate in them and those games. And so if somebody wants to fill in the comments and fill in my chart here, that would be very useful. I'd love to republish this thing, circulate it, and if we could get people on board with using these types of ratings, then maybe we could have some visibility into this. But rating of 4 would be the highly greedy in-app purchases, the ones that are just yes, it is pay for convenience, but they've put in convenience gating, and the grind is way too heavy for what you get out of it, and it's just a lot easier to pay. That's pretty bad. And then once again, the 5s are just the egregious ones, the gotchas, all those types of things. If we could utilize this would give us visibility. And what's interesting with, and how this all aligns to all my earlier talk, is that this actually aligns really well with our time continuum and our time versus money. So if we look at that, you can see that a low rating aligns very well with people who have a lot of playtime and low money are going to be seeking games with a rating of 1, whereas people who have a lot of disposable income aren't going to care as much and are willing to participate in a game rated as 5. And so everything just kind of aligns very well when we think of things in terms of time and money. And if you can picture yourself on the scale, well, I'm a 2, then you should really only be targeting 2s, max 3 type games. Anyways, I would love to see a rating like this surface. I would love to see some people get behind this and talk about it and maybe get some activity here. Who knows? For people who have stuck around this long, I apologize for the earlier audio issues. I don't know what's causing them, and I'm too lazy to re-record things. Those people who are here that are part of my original audience, I'm sorry this is not baseball, but I really felt the need to address this. I do appreciate everybody's attention. I hope we can get some discourse going around this and maybe some traction on the ratings, but I hope I've opened some eyes in regards to this. Thanks, everybody.